Welcome to Crime Family. In today's episode, I will be talking about the Andrea Yates case, which was very high profile and became known as the killer mom case. It's about a typical suburban mom who ended up doing an unthinkable act, which would change the lives of everyone involved. So let's get started. So like I said in the intro, this case was all over the news when it happened back in July of 2001. And it's about Andrea Yates, the mother who drowned her 5 children in the bathtub while her husband was at work. So before I dive deep into this case, have you guys heard of it or know anything about it?
I know a little bit about it. I watched a documentary not that long ago, but I don't know a whole lot, I'd say.
Yeah, I do know a lot. Or not a lot about it, but I'm familiar with it because it would always come up in when you're looking up top true crime cases or whatever of those lists and stuff. It would always be included in there. So I'm very familiar with the name, and I do know what happens. So yes, I'm quite familiar, even though I don't know all the little details.
Okay, great. Before I get into the actual case and what went on, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a back history of Andrea's life and what it was like growing up in her teens. So Andrea Yates was born in Hallsville, Texas, which is a small city in Harrison County, Texas, and it has a population of about 3,134. Andrea was the youngest of 5 children. Her mother was a German immigrant, and her father, Emmett Kennedy, was an Irish immigrant. And in her family, depression was something that Andrea witnessed as a young child, because her siblings suffered from it, and it ran in her family as well. But her siblings were able to get support with the help from family and friends and doctors and medication. But unfortunately, when Andrea started to become depressed, those supports that were there for her siblings were not there for when she needed them. So she struggled quite a bit in her teens, and she ended up suffering from bulimia and depression at the age of 17. And she told a friend that she was contemplating suicide. So, like I said, she didn't have the support she needed, like her siblings got, and that was something that she really struggled with. But however, despite her struggles with mental health, she was a straight A student, the valedictorian of her senior class, the captain of the swim team, and an officer in the National Honors Society. She went on to graduate from Milby High School in Texas and went on to complete a 2-year pre-nursing program at the University of Houston and graduated from the University of Texas Health Center. And from 1989 to 1994, she worked as a registered nurse at a University of Texas Anderson Cancer Society. So her life was going pretty well. It seemed to be going great. She seemed happy, and she seemed to love working as a nurse. In the summer of 1989, she met Russell Rusty Yates at the Sunscape Apartments where she was living, and they soon moved in together and ended up getting married in April 17th of 1993. Andrea came from a religious upbringing, and so did Rusty. So because of their religious beliefs, her and Rusty wanted to have as many children as God would let them. And as we heard in previous cases that we've done, this is often common in couples who come from a religious background. So because they wanted to have a lot of children in the future, they ended up buying a 4-bedroom house in Friendswood, Texas. And just before Andrea gave birth to her first child, Rusty accepted a 6-month job in Florida. So they ended up moving into a mobile home. And on February 26, 1994, Andrea gave birth to Noah. And then about a year and a half later, she gave birth to their second child, John, on December 15th, 1995. And by the time they had their third child, Paul, in 1997, they had moved back to Houston, Texas, and were living in a GMC mobile home. Once the Yates had their fourth child, this is when things started to get a bit overwhelming, and Andrea decided to become a stay-at-home mom. And this is when her depression came up again, and this is when her struggles started to resurface. So by June of 1999, Andrea was admitted to the hospital because she had had a nervous breakdown and tried committing suicide by overdosing on pills. And when she was at the hospital, she was prescribed antidepressants and released from the hospital and back into Rusty's care. But because of insurance reasons, Andrea couldn't get the proper help she needed, which is why she was released quite quickly after being admitted to the hospital. And just about a month later, in July of 1999, Andrea was admitted to the hospital again because this time she was begging Rusty to let her die, and she had put a knife to her throat. And Rusty seemed very concerned for her well-being. So when she was put in the hospital this time, she was given a cocktail of medication, and this included the antipsychotic drug called Haldol. After she started taking Haldol, her condition improved and she was released into Rusty's care. And then this is when Rusty decided to move the children into a smaller home, like a bigger home from the trailer that they were living in before. And this was because he thought it would be a good idea for Andrea's mental state. And things seemed to be going pretty well. She seemed to be stabilized and almost back to being herself again, and that loving mother that Rusty knew she could always be. But she ended up in the hospital for a third time just about a month later. And this was because she suffered another breakdown. And at this time, the doctors diagnosed her with postpartum psychosis. Does anybody know the difference between postpartum psychosis and postpartum depression?
I think postpartum psychosis, sometimes it involves like hallucinations, where postpartum depression is just like down in the dumps kind of thing.
Yeah, so postpartum psychosis is when you develop symptoms like hallucinations, delusions, fits of anger, confusion, depression, paranoia, and lack of energy and loss of appetite. It also can include thoughts of harming of the baby. These are just some of the symptoms. Postpartum psychosis is common in women who have had mental health issues, which Andrea had throughout her life. With postpartum psychosis, it is common for mothers to have fear of harming their child or their child drowning. So this was something that the doctors wanted to monitor closely. So because she was diagnosed with this illness, the doctors warned her about the dangers of having another child and how it would put pressure on her and be very unhealthy for her to have another child. And they feared if she did have another child, how that child would be brought up and taken care of. But because of Rusty's and Andrea's religious beliefs, they were back and forth with the idea of having a fifth child. And Rusty was kind of pressuring and persuading her to have that fifth child. And he was saying things like she was a good mother who loved her kids, and that welcoming a fifth child would make their family complete. So despite the warnings from the doctors, Andrea ended up getting pregnant just 7 weeks after she was released from the hospital. Once she became pregnant, she had stopped taking Haldol. And I think this was the doctor's choice. I'm not sure. I couldn't really find a whole lot of information on that, but I'm assuming because she was pregnant, it's not a good idea to take antipsychotic medication. Do you guys have any comments or thoughts of if that would be a reason why they were...
I think, I don't know if I think you can take your medication. Like if people who are on medication because they have a mental health issue, I'm sure that they're allowed to continue their medication when they're pregnant. Like you can't just take them off their medication for 9 months, right? Like I feel like they have to be able to take, I don't think it's substantial evidence to show that would be harmful for the baby. It's just what I think. Like I feel like she would have to remain on it. Like if you're pregnant, you have to remain on your medication that you're taking, right?
I think like when I do like a quick search of like Haldol and pregnancy, it says like it can cause like birth defects and things. So it maybe even if the risk is low, maybe she knew that, but maybe she just didn't want to be on drugs while she was pregnant. So regardless, so maybe she just wanted to get off of them. So the doctor was kind of like helping her with that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, it's hard to say because, like I said, there wasn't a whole lot of information on if that's why she was taken off of it. Like I said, despite being off her medication and the doctors warning her, she ended up welcoming her 5th child on November 30th, 2000, and they welcomed their daughter, Mary. And things seemed to be going pretty well. Andrea seemed to be coping well, and things were getting back to normal. I mean, there was 5 children in the house, pretty young at the time, so I can imagine the house being chaotic. But things seemed to be going well, and Andrea seemed to be managing it well. But this all changed quickly when her father passed away on March 12th, 2001. And Andrea and her dad were pretty close. They had a great relationship, and he was always there to support her when she needed it. So when her father passed away, Andrea was just devastated. Like, she just spiraled out of control. Like, she just lost the person that supported her and that was always there for her. And this is when things started, like I said, to spin out of control. She started to mutilate herself and read the Bible feverishly. She stopped feeding Mary, who was 4 months old at the time. And Andrea was so incapacitated that she had to be hospitalized and was in the hospital from April 2001 until she was released in May of 2001. She spent about a month in the hospital. And while she was in the hospital, she was under the care of Dr. Saeed. And right before she was released from the hospital, the doctor had instructed Rusty to not leave Andrea alone with the kids for any amount of time. Even though she was stable, she was just not in a good mental state to take care of 5 children by herself, so she needed that extra help. So the doctors thought it would be a good idea for her to have someone with her at all times, because they were afraid that if she was left alone too long, she could get very overwhelmed and might do harm to herself or her children. So once Andrea was back home, Rusty, he just wanted things to get back to normal. He started to see a happier Andrea, something he hasn't seen in a few months. So Rusty at this time decided to leave Andrea alone with the kids for like about 20 minutes here and there. Then he started leaving her for like longer periods of time, and he began to like trust her more, and in his mind he thought like she was becoming this wonderful mother that he like knew she could always be. Rusty seemed to have this image that in his mind that Andrea was getting back to herself and thought that she was feeling better, but in reality Andrea like was struggling really bad inside. And sometimes people can look okay on the outside, but on the inside they're struggling. And I don't think he really took the seriousness of her diagnosis, and he just wanted her to get back to the way she was. Like I said, he started to leave her alone.
So he was kind of thinking like, oh, if I just like start doing this and pretend and act like everything's normal the way that I want it to be, then things will just be normal. But he didn't really take into account that like obviously the doctors are saying this, and she might have needed extra support with the kids, and like obviously she wasn't as well as maybe she was presenting at on the outside. So he kind of like dropped the ball a little bit. Mm-hmm. Well, from what it sounds like, I don't know.
Yeah, like I think he like you said, he just wanted to get back to the normal life that he once had. In his mind, he wanted that to be reality, but in reality, that's not how things were. So it's hard to like know exactly how he was feeling at the time. And like I said, she needed that extra help. She needed somebody there with her all the time. And of course, like Rusty had to go to work, so he couldn't be there all the time. So he would get his mother to come over and help her with the kids, and while he was gone at work. So there would be somebody there once in a while, and not, like I said, like he tried to leave her by herself for like longer periods of time. There was a lot of things that were going on with Andrea that maybe Rusty didn't really understand. And like I said, he left her home by herself. And this is when things started to get really bad. And this is where the case kind of turns pretty tragic, pretty quick. So it was a typical day, a typical morning on June 20th, 2001. Rusty had gotten up and gotten ready for work like he always did on this, like it was a normal day. The children were eating breakfast. The dog was running through the house, playing. Everything seemed to be okay. His mother was scheduled to show up an hour after he left. So Rusty usually left for work around 9 a.m. and his mother would come and show up at the house at 10 and watch the children. Before Rusty had left the house, he had kissed his kids goodbye and not knowing that this would be the last time he would ever see his children alive. So he left, and that left Andrea unsupervised for about an hour, and she was by herself with 5 children. So she had fed the children breakfast, and as they were eating, she went upstairs and she had filled the bathtub with water. And after each child was finished, she would one by one took them upstairs, and she ended up drowning them in the bathtub. She started with John, then Paul, then Luke, and laid them in her bed. And then she ended up drowning Mary and left her floating in the tub. And Noah, the oldest son, had come upstairs to ask his mom what was going on, where everybody was. He ended up seeing Mary in the tub and got really scared and started running and tried to escape. But unfortunately, Andrea caught up with him, and she ended up drowning him and leaving him in the tub and laying Mary in John's arms in her bed. She then called the police and was repeatedly saying she needed an officer, but never gave a reason why. And I'm going to play you that 911 call for you guys. It's pretty short, so I'm just going to play that now.
What's your name? Andrea Yates. What's the problem? I just needed to come. Is your husband there? No. So what's the problem? I need him to come. I need to know why we're coming, ma'am. Is he there standing next to you? She? Are you having disturbance? Are you ill or what? Yes, I'm ill. You need an ambulance? No, I need a police officer. You have sent an ambulance.
So, do you have any thoughts about the audio that you just heard, or about the case so far?
Yeah, it's really sad, like hearing the description of how she one by one would do it and then like lay them down on her bed. Like, it's really sad. And the 911 call, it's like obviously you can tell just from the call that she's very, like she's very monotone, very calm, obviously not really grasping like the gravity of what she just did, or maybe she is, but she's not portraying that. And it's just a very calm 911 call, not what you would expect after that. But obviously too, like I always wondered what her reasoning was for calling 911. Like, she must have known that what she just did was horribly wrong, so she called the police, because otherwise, like, she could have done that and then fled, right? And then she could have been just gone if she knew the police were going to come after her. So the fact that she would call the police over to the house to see that right away, it's like she wasn't even really trying to hide it or get away with it in a way.
Yeah, and like, I guess it's just super eerie how calm she is and how much effort it must have taken her to drown all these kids and then chase after the last one, but then she still calls like super calmly. Like, you can definitely tell something is happening inside her head that isn't right, and it's super just startling just to hear how calm it is.
Yeah, like when I first listened to it, like just her tone of voice just startled me. It's like kind of like what Katie was saying, like how much effort that would have taken for her to drown her kids. Like, she doesn't seem out of breath, she doesn't seem distraught, she just seems like calm. And
well, do we know if this is right away that she called the police? Like, maybe she waited a little bit and then called after, or do we know that it was like immediately after?
Well, it was before, like, her mother was supposed to show up or her mother-in-law was supposed to show up at 10, right? This is before her mother-in-law even got there. This is all within like an hour after her husband left, isn't it?
Yes.
Oh yeah,
because her husband left at 9 and the mother-in-law was supposed to show up around 10, so this was within that hour window that this all happened.
It's also crazy that like she doesn't snap out of it after the first one. She's not like, oh my god, like she goes after the second one and then the third one and then the fourth one. Like, she just never snaps out of it at all, and she just continues with all of them, which is super scary.
Like, I just felt so sad for her when I was like watching her, and just like what she must have been going through in her mind to do this. But I'm going to get into a little bit more of that later on in the case. So after she had called 911, she then called her husband and told him that he needed to come home immediately. And when the police had come to her house, they had found that the family dog was locked up in a cage. In reports, police have said that the dog was probably locked up because he would have interfered with Andrea killing her children. And they're probably right. Like, if the dog was like running wild like he normally would, he would be barking and carrying on, because dogs can be pretty protective if someone they love or someone they know is getting hurt. So she probably did lock the dog up to stop him from interfering with what she was about to do. When the police had asked Rusty about the dog, he said the dog was never ever locked up or tied up. He was always running through the house and running through the yard. So this what goes back to what the police concluded, that's why the dog was locked up. So since she had confessed to the crimes once she was arrested, there was no need to do an investigation. So before the trial began, the officers who went to Yates' house, their testimonies were that Andrea seemed unemotional, unkempt, and soaking wet, and how calm she was when she told the police, "I had killed my kids." And also Yates' best friend also testified that Andrea was a sweet and loving mother, but after the birth of her fourth child, she became a totally different person, and she would often just stare into space and could never finish sentences. So this was something that her friend noticed right away, that Andrea was struggling with something. During the first trial, the juries also listened to a long list of mental health illnesses. In an opening statement on June 26, the defense attorney George Parham told the jury that if Andrea was not taken off Haldol, her children would still be alive today. So there is some blaming towards the doctors about whether or not she should have been taken off her meds. But like I said, I think she had stopped taking them because she was pregnant, and I don't think that's something that they should blame the doctors for. Doctors are there to help you, and if they don't think it's right for you to take something while you're pregnant, then they're gonna stop that. So I don't really see them having that argument. I just don't think it's worth it.
Ultimately would have been up to her. If she wanted to stop taking it, then she could have just been like, well, I'm gonna stop regardless of what you say anyway. So they might have thought, well, it's better than her just stopping cold turkey. They could help her wean off of them or take something else instead of that. So I mean, it was probably her decision.
Harm reduction at its finest, or an example of it. Anyway, sorry.
It could have been her decision. I'm not saying it was her decision.
Yeah, but what you were saying though, it's when they realized that she was, sorry, we're getting kind of confused. So she did go off it, right? They told her to go off, or she followed the doctor's orders then.
It's not really clear. There's no,
because the doctor told her not to, and she didn't, so she was following the doctor's orders.
But there's no really information behind that. She was off of it, but it doesn't really say if it's because she was pregnant or she went off it herself. There's no really information to say yes, the doctors took her off it. It's just that she was off of it.
Oh, okay.
And I'm just speculating or assuming that she went off it because she was pregnant. But I don't know, because there's no information about if the doctors took her off or not. But that's what I'm assuming.
Yeah, and I'm saying she might have said she was just going to go off of it regardless. So the doctors really had no choice but to help her wean off of it or give her something instead of that, because she was going to go off it cold turkey or something, maybe.
Okay, so that's your point that I was talking about. So when they realized that she was gonna, obviously she's gonna do what she wants to do, regardless of the doctors can only do so much. If they're telling her, they can give her their advice all that they want, but obviously she's gonna do what she wants. So I guess helping her, knowing she's going to not take it as normally as she would, then obviously their options are limited. But there are things, like you said, wean her off it slowly, or work with her to figure out a way to make it less harmful than just going off it completely or something.
Well, yeah, and
which is why I mentioned harm reduction. So.
Yeah, and that might have been why she shouldn't be alone. They knew if she was coming off this, that she was gonna get worse into this postpartum psychosis. Yeah, so maybe they knew that it was gonna get worse. So they're
so it wasn't the ideal situation, but they were working with what they had.
Yeah,
basically.
And this is just, I'm gonna say my opinion. Maybe you can kind of look at it as Rusty. It was kind of Rusty's fault that she drowned her kids, because he wasn't supposed to leave her alone either. There shouldn't have been an hour. There shouldn't have been an hour time gap. His mother, 9 a.m. His mother should have been there, not 10 a.m.
I feel a lot of people would have that opinion, that. Yes. Because of him that happened. But obviously, if he had known that leaving her alone that day she would have done that, then obviously he wouldn't have. So we can't really blame him for having that happen. But yes, he shouldn't have left her alone. But that doesn't mean that because he left her alone, then that's what
But he also wasn't that supportive of her either. Like he, in his head, in reality, he didn't want her. He wanted her to be that loving mother, but like I don't really think he understood how the seriousness of her diagnosis or what he really knew about it.
Yeah, I don't think he knew the seriousness of it. I don't think it was his fault either, though. Like, I remember I was watching the documentary, the one that I watched. It was by Mugshots, and it was called Killer Women, Mother's Madness, Andrea Yates. And in that one, it was saying, like, they used to live in a converted Greyhound bus, but then Rusty was realizing that she was having really bad mental illness, so he bought them a bigger house because he thought that would help her. So, he didn't have to do that, right? That was him being like, well, what can I do to help her? And when she was having, really bad episodes, he would just kind of, take all the kids and her, and they'd go for, a peaceful walk on the beach. Like, that was his way of helping her, because obviously he didn't know what else to do. So I felt like he really was trying to be involved and help her. And he probably, there's nowhere in his head being like, this is what's going to come if I leave her alone for an hour. There's no way for him to know that.
And it's kind of in hindsight, you can say, well, yeah, obviously knowing what we know now, when we know what happened, that yes, he shouldn't have left her alone. But obviously he's not thinking that oh, if I leave her alone, this is what's going to happen. So yes, it's he shouldn't have left her alone, but also he isn't really to blame, obviously, for what happened. No one is really to blame. I mean, Andrea herself, yes, she's the one who did it, but obviously she was struggling with lots of issues that if she had maybe been on the right medication or was getting the help she needed, it wouldn't have happened either. I don't really think that she was this evil woman who just wanted to do it because she got a thrill out of it. I think she was seriously ill, and this is what happened in her particular case. I don't know, just my opinion, but
yeah, it's really hard to say. We can come up with all these theories of why she did it, or we can say we can blame this, we can blame that, but this is what happened, this is the outcome, and we need to think of Andrea as the victim here too. Like AJ said, she's not, yes, she did a horrible thing, but she also needed help, and she didn't get the help she needed, but yet, like I said, she did a horrible crime, and
it's tragic. It's obviously it's hard to, because there's people out there who are saying obviously she should get the death penalty because she killed her 5 children. So you have those people, and then you have the people who I'm more on the side of she, like you said, Steph, she is a victim herself, even though I'm not excusing what she did, and I think that there is a certain she obviously has to have consequences for what she did. So being charged with murder, going to jail or whatever, obviously something should happen, because you can't just get away with killing 5 people. But I don't know, it's a kind of a weird, I'm trying not to have people come at me, but I'm just trying to say I'm a mental health advocate. This is what can happen, and if it's not taken seriously, I also don't want to say that every person who has a mental illness is going to do this. So I'm struggling with what I'm trying to say. She needed the help that she didn't get, and as a result, this happened. Not saying that it was going to happen to every person who has this illness.
Yeah.
Katie, help me out.
I get what you're trying to say, for sure.
Yeah.
But I also think it was a combination of many different things. She had this postpartum psychosis, and she had she had multiple kids that she was taking care of. She, in the documentary, saying that she wanted to kind of go back to work, she was missing that social aspect, but she didn't have that. And then her father died, who she was really close with. So that all these things were kind of compounding into one really serious situation. So of course, like you said, looking back at it now, you can point blame, but I don't think it was really, there's all these things coming together. It was hard to maybe predict, or maybe it wasn't. I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, we could spend hours just talking about this one subject, but maybe another time. So like I said, during the trial, Yates had confessed that she drowned her 5 children. The medical attorney expert agreed that Yates was psychotic, but according to the Texas law, in order to successfully insert the insanity plea, the defense must not be able to define right from wrong at the time of the crime. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Michael Wellner testified for the prosecution that Yates carried out this efficient and well-planned murder. She knew it was wrong. Wellner theorized that she kept her homicidal plans to herself and didn't tell anyone about her psychosis until after the killings, which kind of fits into maybe Andrea didn't tell Rusty the whole diagnosis. Maybe she just left some parts of it out. But like I said, we don't know. I'm not going to blame either one of them for that. So we know that she was obviously suffering from something, and she needed support, like I said, and we've been saying, then she just didn't get it, and unfortunately this is what happened. Back when she was arrested, she was evaluated by quite a few people, and one of those people being the psychologist. She said during this interview that she had with the psychologist, she said that if she had killed her kids while they were still innocent, that way they would go to heaven, and that she would have defeated Satan. And like I said, Yates turned herself in immediately after the drownings happened, because she thought that her own death would fulfill a biblical prophecy. If she was executed, then Satan would be executed. So Resnick also diagnosed Yates with schizoaffective disorder and severe depression with schizophrenic symptoms. And Dr. Diaz, also, who was a medical expert who did cases like Jeffrey Dahmer and the Unabomber, Diaz was alone in the medical field for this case. He was for the prosecution side, and he said that Yates knew right from wrong. He suspected that Yates had seen a Law and Order episode where a mother pleaded not guilty for reasons of insanity, and that's where Andrea had gotten this idea of killing her kids. But after they looked into it, that Law and Order episode never did exist. So that theory and that what he said didn't really hold up. And in March of 2002, the jury rejected the insanity plea and found Andrea guilty. And although the prosecution wanted the death penalty, the jury refused that and sentenced her to life in prison with no eligibility for parole for 30 years. And you think this is where it ends, but fortunately, there was a new trial given in January 6th of 2005. And the new trial was given because of the false information that was given in the first trial by Dr. Parks Diaz. And like I said, he confessed to giving false testimony, saying that he had seen the Law and Order episode in which the woman got away with drowning her kids, but that episode never did exist. So he kind of made that up. So to the jury, that they might have been persuaded by that. So that's why they gave them a new trial, because of the false testimony by the medical doctor.
That's such a weird thing to make up. Like, you'd think you'd know that people can figure that out, that that's not true. Like, why make up something like that?
Yeah, I don't know. I tried to look information on why he did it, but then didn't really say. And it was confusing to me too. Like, I just don't understand.
Look up.
Yeah.
Like you can easily prove that to be false. Like, and
like the defense at the time, like they looked into the Law and Order. They even called like the writer, I think his name is Dick Wolf, he's the writer of Law and Order, and he said that the episode never existed. So I don't know why he would make
like a quick Google search would have showed you it didn't. But I mean, I guess Google wasn't what it is now. It's 2001, no. But like still, like that's still something that's like it's out there. It's either out there or it's not.
But why risk like getting caught for something so petty like that? I don't know. It doesn't really make sense to me. But anyways, so because he gave false testimony, did they eventually end up making a Law and Order episode about this? I don't know. Like after all, I don't know. I feel like that's something they would, because they do take a lot of stuff from the headlines. They do, yeah. So like maybe after the fact they did. I mean, I could easily look it up now, but yeah, I'm not sure. So like I said, like when he made that false testimony, the jury at the time might have been influenced by that, and because of that, Andrea was giving another trial, and this time she pleaded not guilty by reasons of insanity. And on February 1st, 2006, she was let go on bail, but she had to attend a mental institution. And it just took the jury's 5 days to deliberate, and they found Andrea not guilty by reasons of insanity. And she was committed to the North Texas State Hospital on Vernon campus. And in January 2007, she was moved to the Kernville State Hospital, which is a low security facility in Kernville, Texas. So after the trial was over, there was still a lot of, I want to say like maybe hot air out there of like, should she have been found not guilty? And a lot of it goes back to Rusty and the things that he had said in Andrea's brother had did a Larry King interview. He had told Larry King that Rusty had told Brian in 2001 while they were driving Andrea to a treatment facility. He said that all depressed people need is a swift kick in the pants. This is what Rusty told his Brian Kennedy, which was Andrew's brother.
Okay, I take back my defense of him.
So, like, none of this came out until after the trial. So, like, it kind of, now it's looking like, okay, he didn't really care for how sick she was. Like, it's something she could get over. Like,
Yeah, he wasn't taking it seriously at all.
no. And he was living in the reality that, like, she wasn't sick. So, which is why she left her alone and why he didn't really support her like he should have. So, kind of like, maybe he is to blame for what happened. Maybe he was just pressuring her too much.
Well, obviously, yeah. Like, I don't know. Like I said before, obviously, I'm sure if he had a choice, he's not going to be like, think it's okay that she did what she did. Like, obviously, it's his children too. So obviously, that's a loss for him. So I don't think like he was downplaying it, to say the least. He was downplaying it, didn't take it seriously, didn't really care what the doctors were saying by the sounds of it. And you said it was Rusty that said that thing about all they need is a stick in the pants. Yeah. So like, obviously he, I take back most of my defense of him. Obviously, I don't think that he wanted this to happen, obviously, but he doesn't sound like he's like the best, most sympathetic person or understanding. So, whatever.
Yeah. And like, he kind of blames Andrea for not telling him about her psychosis. Like, he says that the doctors never told him about her postpartum psychosis and that Andrea never told him about it. And he goes on about like just kind of blaming everybody else but himself type thing. Like, I don't know, it just goes to show that maybe he wasn't the supportive, loving husband that everybody thought he was. But that's just my opinion. I don't know. So once the trial was over, Rusty had to come to the terms that Andrea would probably never be able to leave the hospital until she was stable enough to live in the outside world again. So he made the decision to divorce Andrea. And even though it was against his religion, he knew that he needed to move on. But says he forgives Andrea for what she did. And if he knew how sick she really was, then he would have tried to get her the support that she needed. And this tragedy probably would never happen. So because this was a high-profile case back in 2001, media was all over it. And they kind of put the blame on what happened to Andrea on Michael Warnecki, who was a preacher that Rusty met while at Auburn University. And Warnecki would send out letters and messages to his churchgoers. This was something that, like, Andrea and her husband would receive on occasion. Michael Warnecki was someone who, like, he was just a preacher and he, like, an extremist.
I remember in that documentary that I had talked about before, it was said that like Andrea would write him sometimes and he wrote her back and specifically told her that she was weak and evil and that she was the daughter of Eve, who was a wicked witch. And he also believed that kind of modern mothers were lazy and too many of them let their children be rebellious. And it made Andrea believe that her children were going to go to hell because of this. She said that because when people would, like, guests would come over to their house, their children would be like not acting properly, they'd be bad, would treat their guests not very well. And so she thought because of this, her kids were going to go to hell. And in order to prevent that, she would have to kill them while they were still kids and they would go to heaven. So I think that was kind of part of it, why she decided to do this to her kids.
So he's to blame, really, or more so than Rusty.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think he didn't like tell her to do that, but that's just kind of how she took it, I think. And his just kind of like extreme views on stuff that has no basis in reality.
He certainly didn't help
further
the
like
situation.
warping her like illness and her mindset.
Yeah, and of course, like when these allegations came out, both Rusty and Michael both denied them. Rusty said that his family's connection with Michael was not that close. That Michael did not cause Andrea's delusions and that he was only there to help strengthen their marriage. But maybe he didn't know that Andrea was writing back and forth to him. So that could have been a secret that he didn't know. So
Maybe also like Michael Warnicki didn't know the extent of her mental illness, right? Maybe he didn't even know she was mentally ill.
Maybe, yeah.
Like he could have just be saying what he believed and then didn't realize that she was actually going to take it literally.
And then when she did, then they like are backtracking and saying like denying it and saying, "Oh, I didn't say that," because obviously they know that it would look bad.
And the media was just all over it at the time. Like that's
Yeah.
Well, yeah, he could be saying that he said those things, you know, to try and like encourage mothers to be more disciplinarians of their children and things, not kill them while they're young, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So after all of that was done and the trial was finally over, Rusty had decided to divorce Andrea in 2004 because he says that since the murders that he just couldn't stay married to her, even though like he could go visit her at the hospital where she was staying, but he just like he couldn't come to grips to what she's done, like having the memories of the children and having her like seeing her every day. It was just something that he needed to step away and trying to have a better life and still hold on to the memories of his kids, but not being connected to Andrea. So he did end up getting married again shortly after they got divorced to a girl named Laura Arnold, and they have one son together, but then she divorced him in 2015. Andrea is now 58 years old and has spent more than 15 years at Kernville State Hospital, and during her free time she enjoys doing arts and crafts. Do you guys have any final thoughts on the case or the outcome? And
will she ever get out?
It didn't say, but I'm going to assume she might if she has the proper medication and she can get the support she needed outside of the hospital. Like if she can get like into the community.
Well, wasn't her
help.
sentence like no chance of parole for 30 years?
That was her first trial. This is her second trial. She was sent to the mental institution.
Oh, for life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
I don't know if it was for life though. It didn't say.
Do you think she should get out? Like, what's your opinion on that?
I think so.
I think if she has the right help in the community, if she has support around her and she can go to like meetings or like she can get the proper medication and a counselor, I think she could be an okay person, because she's not a horrible person. She was sick, and we see this in a lot of cases. We saw it in the texting suicide case. Like, look what happened to him, and it's just people just don't get the help they need, and it's unfortunate, and it's still reality today. Like, the mental health issues that go on today are still like people still don't have the right help that they need, and it's frustrating. I know I find it frustrating for like people that just can't get the help because there's just not enough resources out there and not enough advocacy and stuff like that.
Yeah, and like people are probably going to come and say like, oh, after I say that I think she should get out, people are going to be like, oh, so it's okay to murder 5 people, but I don't know. I just think it's like, obviously, I don't know. Like I said before, I don't think she's this evil woman who just has like hate in her heart and wants to kill people. Like, obviously, this is an example that she didn't get the help she needed. Had she gotten the help and she had more supportive people around her, this might not have happened. And not saying it's okay. Obviously, it's horrible. And I feel terrible for the kids lives were cut short. But it's like, I don't know. Like,
and like you have to like look back at her childhood. Like she had a decent childhood. Like she was straight A honor student. She went to university. She was a good student and a good person, and just her mental health, she needed help and she didn't get it. And unfortunately, that's what the outcome. I don't think she is someone that people would deem as a monster and should never see the light of the outside world again. I think if she had the proper help, she could be okay out in the real world. And like, I think she should be able to have a life outside of the mental institution. That's just my opinion, but I mean,
yeah,
I try to see.
I think there's still like this stigma around like any kind of mental illness. And like when I was kind of looking up postpartum psychosis, it's scary how common it actually is. Like apparently, according to Susan O'Malley from Oprah.com, she says that roughly 1 in 1,000 mothers are affected by postpartum psychosis. So that's like pretty common. Wow. And like I've never even hardly ever heard of it. So all these people are affected with it, but either they don't talk about it, they're ashamed, or nobody wants to really talk about this kind of thing.
I mean, the number might even be way higher. Like there's probably so many unreported
Yeah, that's
cases
true.
of it too, and like, or people who like go through it and have it but don't really know what it is. Like, you know, they go through it and maybe it passes for them, and then they don't, you know what I mean, and they don't really like go seek help and then actually diagnosed with it. So
Yeah.
like, I mean, I don't know if it is something like, because I know postpartum depression, I don't know, but postpartum depression, like that's like a period you would go through, but then you could get over it, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like it's just, so like if this is the same thing, like it might be something they do go through and then no, I never actually seek any help for it.
Postpartum depression is a lot more common in mothers. Who
Yeah,
just
that's
have
actually
their
1 in
baby.
10,
Yeah.
I think, according to that same
Yeah.
article.
I mean,
Like just,
I don't
but like you just think about like how stigmatized it is. Like if someone were to say, "Yeah, I was diagnosed with postpartum psychosis," like just the word psychosis, people would think like, you know, you know the
maybe they
ridicule
should-
people are going to get for that.
they should like word it differently. I don't know if that's the problem.
So, yeah,
Psychosis is such as like a scary word. I just think of like
Yeah.
hallucinations and like
Like-
hearing things and like super creepy.
like,
yeah. Like,
like,
and
as a-
honestly, like the media doesn't help. Like you see movies and stuff where people are psychosis and like,
Oh, I know.
you know,
And
the
like,
image that you would have
Yeah,
of somebody in
yeah.
that state. So
yeah.
that doesn't help either.
and I was gonna say like a lot of people like I know have suffered from postpartum depression. Like, I mean, I didn't as a mom, but there was days where I just like it was just I find it struggling just to like if the baby was crying or whatever. Like I just found it hard, and it was just like you're kind of all alone and like just a lot of work. And I feel like I wasn't depressed about it, but I feel like if I was feeling the way I was feeling, I couldn't imagine what other people were feeling that had a worse condition than like what I was feeling. Like I could just get over it in like a day or so, but it's just not easy. I think everybody who becomes a first time mom or whatever, they have that feeling of this is hard. Like you need help. You can't just do it on your own type thing. I don't know. That's just my opinion. How I felt. I don't know. Katie, did you feel like that?
But
Yeah,
I feel like that's like a
definitely
normal
did.
feeling. It's like overwhelming, but it's not like depression.
Yeah.
Like postpartum depression would be like an actual like physical diagnosis.
but,
but
like,
like
there
just being
was-
overwhelmed, I feel like it's just
Yeah.
normal given the
And she was overwhelmed because she had like 5 young kids. They were all like within like a year or two apart.
Yeah, it's like she could have suffered from postpartum psychosis or depression for each kid, but never had a chance to really recover because she had another one coming. So it's just kind of like piled on. And then by
like,
the time she had this last one, it's just like this huge problem.
And then maybe we can link it back to religion, because in the religion, like having more kids is like what God wants. Like you can have as many kids as you want. And like maybe it's like they get so overwhelmed with their religious beliefs that sometimes it just takes over their whole.
Yeah, like that
whole
could have been a
life.
stressor too. Like your religion states that you should have as many kids as you can, but then like feeling like you shouldn't or don't want to is kind of like, well, maybe, you know, there's these mixed signals. So it's
yeah, like maybe
yeah.
she wasn't like physically or mentally up for it, but like because she had that pressure, it was like, well, I need to have as many kids as, you know, God
And
is
then, like,
allowing, wants me to have
yeah.
more kids. I need to have
And
more
then
kids.
that one person that you could always count on, her father, who's no longer there anymore. It's like, who does she go to? Like, who does she have in her corner? There's nobody that she can go to. So it's like, she can talk to Rusty, but like we said, like maybe he didn't support her like he should have. But
Well, he didn't seem to have the best attitude about it either.
so like she had nobody, and like there's a lot of people like her out there that just don't have anybody to talk to or any like or the money to get help, which is a big issue as well. I mean, we could talk forever about.
Oh yeah, I remember that came up in this case in that documentary where it was saying she should have stayed in like a hospital longer than she should have, but like their insurance didn't cover it and they couldn't afford it, so she had to be released, even though they knew she needed to stay for a lot longer. So that's like a problem too. It's just like the healthcare system isn't going to support these people that need long-term help.
There should be cases if you don't have the money, like I don't know, places or like nonprofit organizations
Well,
out there.
I'm
to
sure
help
there
these
are. Like,
kids.
I'm guaranteed there are, but you probably don't need, like, if they're smaller, you don't hear about them. But also, too, like, they're not for profit. Like, they have to be funded by someone. If the government's funding
Yeah.
them, like, why, you know what I mean? Like, obviously, I feel like a lot of it is like the government underfunds these sorts of programs because they don't see it as important, or it's just not really what they delegate the funding to. So they're obviously underfunded, and like if they're underfunded, they're not going to be able to help as many people as they should be able to, and they're not going to be able to help as well as they would be able to. So it's like all like systemic.
We could talk forever about this. Like we could have like a whole like 7-8 episodes of just about mental health. And going back to what we were just talking about, I hope she gets out. I hope she can try to have that normal life, and I hope that she will. And maybe we'll have an update the news or something will tell us. Maybe she gets out. Who knows? But she spent 15 years already in the mental institution. So
Well, it'll be longer than that. When did she go in? Didn't she go in? Oh, I
she went in 2006.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So yeah, so if you or anyone you know is struggling with a mental health concern, there are lots of resources out there to help you. If you are in Canada, there's a lot of mental health resources within Canada, and the Canadian Centre for Mental Health and Sport, CCMHS, they are a great resource. We'll put the link to their website in the show notes, and they have a list of resources within Canada that are great. They have like the resources for mental health, and then they have the names of the mental health organizations across Canada. So very good resource. And like I said, we'll put that in the show notes.
If you like what you heard and you want to hear more cases like this, you can follow us on Instagram at Crime Family Podcast or on Twitter at Crime Family Pod 1. You can also follow our Facebook page at Crime Family Podcast. And we also have an email address. You can send us a case suggestion or comments and feedback or whatever. It's crimefamilypodcast@gmail.com.
If you're using Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave us a review and a rating. Really helps, others know about the podcast and what they're in for. So please, if you like us, please show your support by reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. I think Apple Podcasts is one of the only ones where you can actually leave a review. Most of them you can't even leave reviews. So if your platform that you use allows reviews, then just leave it. A review on there.
Just leave it.
Just leave it. Leave a review on that. But I know Apple Podcasts is the main one. But yes, that's a great way to show your support as well. So thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week with a whole new episode.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for joining us.
Peace.
Thank you.
Bye.